Keep it rolling. The breakout creates a new front. August 27th, 1944, somewhere on a dust-choked road outside Chartres, France. The late summer heat hangs low over the wheat fields, and the air tastes like exhaust and pulverized stone as a column of olive-drab trucks growls forward in a steady, relentless line. Headlights hooded, windshields filmed with grime. Each vehicle marked with a small red circle, Red Ball, painted like a promise on the side. Private First Class James Red Watkins, a driver in the Transportation Corps, grips the wheel of a 2.5-ton GMC CCKW, deuce and a half, and feels the entire cab vibrate with the engine's effort as he bounces through ruts. His hands already blistered under his gloves because he has been driving for hours and will drive for hours more, day into night into day, because in late August 1944 the war in France has suddenly outrun its own supply lines. Behind Watkins, the canvas-covered bed is stacked with jerry cans and crates, gasoline and ammunition packed like the lifeblood of an army, and the weight makes the truck sluggish, but sluggish is better than empty. Up ahead, a military policeman stands at a junction with a white-gloved arm and a baton, snapping the convoy through a turn onto a road that has effectively become a conveyor belt, a one-way artery reserved for supply traffic, because the Allies have smashed out of Normandy and begun racing across France so fast that rail lines, depots, and ports can't keep up. And the German front, once a wall, has become a retreating, reshaping thing that still fights hard wherever it can, meaning Allied spearheads need fuel and shells at the exact moment the distance back to the beaches is getting longer by the day. The soundscape is pure motion, gears grinding, engines whining under load, the slap of tires on patched pavement, and the constant metallic clatter of cargo shifting as trucks brake and surge. Occasionally a broken-down vehicle sits at the shoulder with its hood up, steam rising, a driver cursing as a wrecker team tries to clear it fast, because a single stalled truck can snarl the whole stream, and the Red Ball Express is built on one uncompromising rule: keep it moving. Watkins glances into his side mirror and sees nothing but more trucks, a continuous chain that seems to stretch back into the haze toward Normandy, and that image, endless wheels and cargo, captures what German defenders are beginning to feel, even if they can't name it. The Allies aren't only advancing with tanks and infantry, they're advancing with throughput, with transport, with a supply system improvised at speed to feed an offensive that is hungry beyond anything pre-war planners hoped. A few days earlier, after the breakout and the rapid push, American units found themselves in the strangest kind of danger. Not enemy fire, but empty fuel tanks. Patton's Third Army could move like a knife when fueled, but even a knife stops when the hand goes numb, and the hand in modern war is logistics: gasoline, ammunition, rations, spare parts, and every mile forward stretches the line. In response, Allied planners and logisticians created a dedicated truck route system, what becomes the Red Ball Express, using a priority road network and round-the-clock driving to rush supplies from Normandy depots forward to the armies, bypassing rail bottlenecks and damaged infrastructure. Watkins's own world is smaller than strategy. It is the immediate dangers of speed and fatigue, blackout driving that strains the eyes, narrow French roads crowded with military traffic and refugees, the risk of collisions in dust, the ever-present possibility of German aircraft or strafing, rare by late 1944 but never entirely absent, and the simplest enemy of all, sleep. He has a buddy riding shotgun whose job is to stay awake and keep him awake, to slap his shoulder, pass him cigarettes, point out hazards, because falling asleep at the wheel doesn't just kill you, it cuts the artery for everyone behind you. When they stop briefly at a control point, MPs check markings and wave them through without delay, and a signboard with bold arrows points Red Ball route, a direction that feels almost surreal, an improvised highway of war created in days, policed like a lifeline. At a forward dump near the edge of the moving front, Watkins finally brakes hard, dust boiling around the truck as men in stained uniforms swarm in, unloading jerry cans and crates with practiced urgency because the supplies are already late by the time they arrive, and somewhere a tank company is waiting, engines idling, commanders watching their fuel gauges like countdown timers. The moment the cargo hits the ground, the truck is turned around, empty now, lighter, faster, and sent back along the return leg to pick up another load, because the Red Ball Express is not about delivering once, it's about cycling until the offensive either reaches a port that can feed it or grinds down from its own appetite. Watkins wipes sweat and dust from his face and looks toward the east, toward the direction the armies have gone, and he can almost feel the German problem in reverse. Every hour that this truck stream runs is another hour the retreating enemy is denied breathing room. Another hour the Allies can keep pressure on bridges, rail nodes, and road junctions. Another hour tanks can keep moving when the enemy expects them to pause. Modern war, Watkins realizes without having the words for it, is being decided by the mundane violence of transport. A truck's ability to keep rolling, a driver's ability to stay awake, and a supply system's ability to turn a continent's roads into an extension of the beachhead. August 29, 1944, Normandy to Chartres corridor. What looks like a simple convoy from the cab becomes, when you zoom out, a managed organism, and the Red Ball Express starts to reveal itself not as a slogan, but as an engineering of traffic, labor, and priority, born out of a crisis that every Allied commander can feel in his bones. Too much success, too fast. After the breakout, the Allied advance is outrunning rail repair and port capacity, and even though Cherbourg has been captured, it is still being rebuilt and cleared, and the beaches that landed the invasion are now far behind the spearheads, meaning every gallon of fuel has to travel hundreds of miles to reach the front. In a field headquarters, staff officers with maps and grease pencils lay down a new solution with the blunt logic of emergency. Designate a one-way go route for loaded trucks and a separate return route for empties. Post military police at every junction. Mark the vehicles with the red ball so they can be waved through without argument. And keep the trucks moving around the clock. Because the only way to feed an army that is sprinting is to turn roads into arteries. Watkins experiences the system as discipline. MPs with batons forcing the flow, rest halts rationed, passing rules enforced, breakdowns yanked off the road by wreckers so the stream doesn't clot. At a control point, a lieutenant in a dusty helmet checks a clipboard and shouts distances. Chartres, 12 miles. Dreux, 28. While a mechanic crawls under a truck with a wrench, trying to keep it alive for one more trip, because the Red Ball Express choose vehicles the way battle choose men, wearing tires bald, overheating engines, breaking axles, and grinding transmissions into metal paste, all in exchange for speed. And speed, in late summer 1944, is the only currency that matters, because the German forces retreating across France are still capable of hard defensive stands if given time to reorganize, and the Allies want to deny them that time by pushing relentlessly toward the Seine, toward the Meuse, toward the German border. At a depot area behind the front, the Red Ball's true scale becomes visible. Hundreds of trucks lined up like a factory queue, drivers sleeping under their vehicles or on the ground, dispatchers shouting load assignments, stacks of jerry cans and ammunition crates piled like building blocks, and the constant thump of forklifts and muscle labor moving cargo in a rhythm that feels industrial. Many of the drivers are black soldiers in segregated units, men who in civilian life were denied basic respect, now entrusted with the literal lifeblood of the advance, their work essential and exhausting, yet often unseen in the glory narratives of tanks and infantry. Watkins watches a fellow driver, Corporal Lou Johnson, wipe his hands on his trousers and grin with hollow pride as he climbs back into his cab. Because for all the grinding hardship, there is a fierce satisfaction in knowing that the front depends on you, that if you stop, the tanks stop. The road itself becomes a battlefield of logistics. French villages reduced to choke points where stone houses force convoys into single file, bridges that can't handle heavy traffic without repair, dust clouds so thick that tail lights vanish, and the ever-present risk of accidents when tired men drive heavy trucks too fast for the conditions. MPs enforce speed limits, but the drivers push anyway because the needs at the front are brutal and specific. Gasoline today, artillery rounds tonight, rations tomorrow morning, and a late truck can mean a delayed attack, a stalled armored thrust, or an infantry unit waiting under shell fire for ammunition. In some places, engineers patch roads at night as convoys roll past, shovel by shovel, because the Red Ball route isn't a fixed highway. It's a living improvisation that must be maintained in motion. At the receiving end, near forward dumps, officers tally tonnage and curse shortages, because the demand is endless. The Red Ball Express, in its peak weeks, will move thousands of tons of supplies per day and employ thousands of trucks and drivers, an improvised logistics surge that becomes famous precisely because it looks like an industrial miracle performed on European roads. German defenders, watching the Allied advance, feel the effect in the strangest way. Not always as overwhelming numbers at the point of contact, but as an advance that refuses to pause, armored columns appearing again after they should have run out of fuel, artillery firing steadily when shells should have been scarce, infantry units staying supplied as they push deep, because somewhere behind them, a river of trucks keeps replenishing. To the Germans, who are now short of fuel themselves and increasingly reliant on rail lines that Allied aircraft and partisans disrupt, the Red Ball's relentless road-borne supply looks like a kind of American magic, a demonstration that the enemy's real strength is not only bravery or tactical skill, but the ability to move mass continuously. Watkins feels that magic as exhaustion. His eyes burn at night, his body aches, and when he finally stops at a rest point, he doesn't so much sleep as drop, while another crew takes over another truck, and another convoy line keeps rolling because the system has been designed to be indifferent to individual limits. In the cab, he keeps a small routine: coffee, cigarettes, loud talk with his buddy. Because routine is how you survive monotony and fear, and monotony is the Red Ball's hidden killer. A man can stay alert under bullets, but hours of darkness and engine noise can lull him into the deadliest mistake. Still, he drives, because the Red Ball Express is not a glamorous assignment but a decisive one, and the entire Allied advance in late 1944 is balanced on the thin edge between momentum and stall. September 2nd, 1944. Near the edge of Patton's Third Army supply area. A forward refueling point is nothing more than a churned field, canvas tarps, and mountains of jerry cans that gleam dully in the sun like stacked metal bones. Yet it has the gravity of a fortress, because every armored unit within reach is hungry for the same thing: gasoline. And without it, the most terrifying weapon on the battlefield becomes a stationary target. Lieutenant Frank Delaney, an armored officer, stands beside his Sherman and watches the fuel gauge with the same anxious intensity a pilot watches his altimeter, because the German line is cracking and retreating, and the dream of cutting them off feels close enough to taste. But the dream runs on octane. To the west, a Red Ball convoy arrives in a dirty roar, and Delaney feels a surge of relief that is almost anger. Relief because the fuel is here, anger because it was nearly late, because every mile the trucks had to drive is a mile the tanks could not. And the gap between what the front wants and what the rear can deliver is the true battlefield now. Watkins rolls in with his GMC, brakes hard, and jumps down, his boots sinking into mud churned by thousands of tires, and he and other drivers begin the routine: unload fast, hand off paperwork, turn around, while Delaney's crew swarms the jerry cans like starving men, pumping fuel into tanks through hoses and funnels, spilling some, cursing, trying to make the process quicker, because even refueling under a hot sun feels like exposed time. In the distance, artillery grumbles, and that sound is a reminder that logistics doesn't happen in a vacuum. German guns still exist, German patrols still probe, and every supply point is a potential target if the enemy can find it. Yet the Red Ball system is built to accept risk, because the larger risk is momentum dying. Behind the immediate scene is a deeper structural truth. The Allies in late summer 1944 have a supply crisis, not because they are weak, but because their victory in Normandy created a sudden expansion of distance. The front is far from the beaches, rail networks are damaged or not yet fully restored, and port capacity is still limited, so the burden falls on trucks, and the Red Ball Express becomes a stopgap designed to bridge the gap between coastal depots and the fast-moving armies. Delaney's commander wants to keep pushing toward the Moselle, toward Metz, toward the German frontier, but every plan now begins with tonnage calculations. How many gallons delivered? How many rounds? How many days of rations? And those numbers are shaped by what Watkins and thousands like him can haul over battered French roads. In a nearby command post, a logistics officer marks a board with daily figures, and the numbers look impressive, thousands of tons moved. Yet they are still never enough, because an army in motion consumes fuel at an astonishing rate, and every additional division forward multiplies demand. This is why the Red Ball Express feels like a miracle and a failure at the same time. It is moving mountains, yet the front keeps asking for new mountains. Watkins climbs back into his cab with hands stained by fuel and dust, and as he pulls away, he passes a line of wrecked or exhausted trucks being cannibalized for parts, hoods open like wounded mouths, mechanics stripping them with ruthless efficiency because the system can't wait for perfect maintenance. The Red Ball's speed is paid for in equipment attrition, and by September, the strain is visible everywhere. Tire piles, broken axles, overheated engines, drivers with thousand-yard stares, and still the convoys run, because the Allied advance is now a race between logistics and German recovery. On the German side, the effect is felt as a frustration bordering on disbelief. Units that retreat and try to establish a defensive line find that Allied forces press them again faster than expected, not because the Allies are reckless, but because fuel and ammunition keep arriving. German officers, already constrained by severe fuel shortages and disrupted rail movement, watch American armor and artillery maintain pressure and realize the enemy's greatest advantage is not a secret weapon, but a transport machine. Trucks, drivers, roads turned into a priority network that keeps combat power fed. Delaney hears a rumor that German defenders call it the Red Ball too, that they've noticed the markings, the endless convoys, and the way American thrusts seem to refill their strength overnight, and he believes it, because he has watched his own unit go from near empty to mobile again in a single delivery cycle. Still, even with the Red Ball Express, Allied commanders feel the constraints. Some armies get priority, others slow. Debates flare between leaders who want to thrust to Berlin and leaders who insist on clearing ports and securing supply lines. The war's operational decisions are increasingly shaped by logistics reality, and the Red Ball is both a solution and a symptom. A temporary artery built because the permanent body of supply, ports, railways, pipelines, has not caught up yet. As night falls, Watkins drives again, headlights dimmed, road signs barely visible, and he feels the war become pure endurance. Engine noise and darkness, the endless bounce of the cab, the knowledge that somewhere up ahead men are fighting and waiting, and that the line between advance and stall may be as thin as a rubber tire. When a truck swerves slightly and corrects, the entire convoy ripples like a living thing because one mistake could cascade into disaster, and the drivers know it. Yet they keep rolling because the Red Ball Express has turned logistics into a frontline act, and every mile Watkins drives is a mile of pressure applied to a retreating enemy. September 10th, 1944, near the approaches to the Moselle River, Oberleutnant Hans Keller, a German staff officer attached to a battered Kampfgruppe, stands in the doorway of a farmhouse commandeered as a command post and listens to the distant growl of engines that never seems to stop. A low, continuous thunder beyond the hedgerows and shattered villages. And what unnerves him isn't the sound of tanks, it's the sound of trucks, hundreds of them, moving in a steady pulse like a mechanical heartbeat. Keller's men are short of everything: fuel rationed by the liter, ammunition stocks thin, radios unreliable, and above all time, because every attempt to form a new line seems to be met by Allied pressure that arrives again before the German units can dig in properly. He looks at a map where retreat routes are penciled in and erased, and he feels the humiliation of being chased not only by enemy formations, but by enemy supply, by a system that seems to keep feeding the advance, no matter how far it stretches. And when a runner reports that American armor is on the road again, Keller snaps, "How? They should be dry," because he is thinking in the old logic of operational pauses, the idea that speed creates its own limits, yet the Americans keep breaching those limits with transport. Outside, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane doesn't appear. The skies are mostly Allied now, and Keller's ability to see the enemy is reduced to glimpses and rumors, dust columns, tire tracks, the occasional captured document, and the bitter reports from infantry outposts that claim they saw endless truck convoys marked with a red circle. In staff talk, the Allied system becomes a kind of myth, and Keller hears older officers mutter that the Americans fight like merchants, that they win with production and movement, not with cunning. Yet as he watches his own fuel-starved vehicles sit idle, he realizes there is nothing mythical about it. There is simply an enemy who can move mass faster than you can react. And in 1944, that is a form of superiority as decisive as air power. Across the Moselle, American artillery begins to range in, steady, methodical fire that suggests abundant shells, and Keller thinks of German ammunition trains being shredded by Allied fighter bombers, of rail lines disrupted, of bridges destroyed, and he understands the strategic contrast. Germany's logistics are constrained by collapsing infrastructure and air attack, while the Americans are improvising around damaged rail by turning roads into a priority network, pushing supplies forward by the brute force of trucks and drivers. That night, Keller moves with his unit as it pulls back again, and the retreat is full of small humiliations. Abandoned vehicles because there's no fuel, guns left behind because there's no tractor, wounded men carried because there's no ambulance. And each abandonment is a direct result of supply failure. When they reach a new village, Keller sees American flares on the horizon and hears engines again, and he realizes the enemy is not pausing, not giving the Germans the one thing they desperately need. Somewhere out there, Keller imagines, a driver like Watkins is grinding through the dark on a designated route, guided by MPs and signs and an organized flow, and that mental image, an enemy supply system operating like a machine, becomes more frightening than any single tank, because you can destroy a tank, but destroying a system requires breaking its rhythm everywhere at once. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, the Red Bull Express's strain is reaching its own limits. Trucks are worn down, drivers exhausted, fuel consumption enormous, and the very act of hauling fuel forward consumes fuel, a logistical paradox that planners feel like a headache behind the eyes. New solutions begin to emerge alongside the Red Bull, repairing rail lines, opening ports, pushing pipelines such as Pluto-related arrangements and overland fuel pipelines, because truck transport alone cannot sustain the deepest advances indefinitely. An Allied command debates strategy in the shadow of supply math. Watkins, back in his cab, feels the system's stress as a tightening schedule and harsher enforcement. MPs more aggressive at junctions, convoy spacing stricter, rest shorter, breakdowns less tolerated, because any slowdown is felt at the front within days. He sees drivers pulled off the road for dangerous fatigue, sees accidents that scatter crates and bodies, and he realizes the Red Bull's victory is paid for in attrition and human endurance. Still, the convoys roll, and when they arrive at forward dumps, they keep Allied guns firing and Allied armor moving, ensuring that German units like Keller's never fully regain their balance. Keller, in his farmhouse command post, finally receives intelligence that makes the truth unavoidable. The Allies have created a dedicated supply highway system, running day and night, pushing thousands of tons forward, and the scale is such that even if German units ambush a convoy here or there, it doesn't stop the flow. He looks at the report and feels the war's modern logic click into place with cold clarity. This is not 1918, where a front could freeze while both sides regrouped. This is an industrial chase in which whoever keeps their forces fueled and fed dictates tempo, and tempo dictates outcomes. By the time Keller steps outside again, the distant truck roar has returned, rolling through the dark like surf, and he understands, with a bitterness that tastes like defeat, that the Red Ball Express is not just supplying American armies, it is attacking German defenders psychologically, proving that every retreat may be followed immediately, that the enemy can keep coming, and that the battlefield is no longer bounded by what you can see, it is bounded by what you can deliver. September 18th, 1944, near the Lorraine sector, the Red Ball route still runs, but it no longer feels like a miracle. It feels like an overworked heart, pumping harder while the body grows heavier, because the Allies have reached the point where distance, infrastructure, and demand begin to punish even the most aggressive transport system. Watkins drives past a line of trucks with shredded tires stacked like dead animals at the roadside, and the sight is so common now it barely registers, until he sees a driver sitting on a fender with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking, not from fear of Germans, but from pure fatigue and frustration, the kind that comes when you're asked to do the impossible every day and then told it still isn't enough. At a forward dump, officers argue about priorities: gasoline for armor, ammunition for artillery, rations for infantry, bridging gear for engineers. And every argument is really about whose attack will move and whose will stall, because supply is now the throttle of the entire front. In the distance, the Moselle line and fortress cities like Metz begin to harden into resistance that demands heavy shells and sustained fuel, and that demand collides with a logistics truth. The trucks can only carry so much, and the roads can only absorb so many. The Red Ball Express, born as an emergency surge, begins to strain under its own success. Keeping thousands of trucks running requires spare parts, maintenance depots, replacement vehicles, driver rotations, fuel to fuel the fuel haulers, and each additional mile makes the system less efficient because a round trip takes longer and burns more gasoline. Watkins feels it when his dispatch order changes: longer runs, fewer rest halts. And when he arrives at a depot and sees a shorter line of loaded trucks than he saw a week ago, because cargo is piling up at ports and railheads that can't be unloaded fast enough or move forward fast enough, creating a backlog that looks like abundance but acts like scarcity at the front. Allied planners begin shifting emphasis as September deepens. Rail repair crews push lines forward, engineers rebuild bridges and yards, ports beyond Normandy, like those along the Channel and later Antwerp, become critical objectives, because without major ports, the Allied advance will always be constrained by how much can be hauled over roads. On the front, Lieutenant Delaney watches his Sherman unit's movement schedule tighten, pauses lengthen, and he begins to sense the operational consequence. The Germans are no longer simply being chased, they are being met, and meeting requires sustained supply, not just momentum. The Red Ball can keep pressure on, but it cannot create infinite supply. And as the Allied armies spread across a broad front, the competition for tonnage becomes strategic, shaping decisions at the highest level: where to thrust, where to pause, which army gets the gas. The irony is brutal. The Red Ball Express helped create the rapid advance that made supply the limiting factor again, because success expanded the battlefield faster than the logistical base could expand with it. Watkins, rolling through dusk, sees MPs still waving convoys through, still enforcing the one-way system. Yet the rhythm feels less frantic and more strained, like a machine approaching its tolerance. Breakdowns take longer to clear, replacement tires are scarcer, and the drivers are more irritable because the war's glamour has never touched their work. Only the workload has. He hears that the Red Ball Express will be scaled down as rail lines improve and new supply routes open, not because it failed, but because it was never meant to be permanent, a stopgap that bought time and momentum at a cost that couldn't be sustained indefinitely. On the German side, Oberleutnant Keller senses the shift as well, not as relief, but as a subtle change in Allied tempo. Fewer sudden leaps, more deliberate battles, more time for German units to dig in and make the Allies pay for every river crossing and fortress town. Yet Keller knows this isn't German recovery in the old sense. It's Allied logistics catching its breath. The Germans still lack fuel and air cover, still bleed under Allied artillery and fighter bombers. But the brief window where they were simply outrun begins to close, and that window had been created by trucks and drivers, as much as by armored divisions. In a command tent, a senior Allied staff officer, tired, blunt, points at a map and says what everyone has come to understand. Tonnage decides. And the phrase is not cynical, it is factual. The Red Ball Express proved that modern war is movement fed by supply, and it also proved that supply systems have ceilings. The trucks can shock an enemy, keep pressure on, and enable breakthroughs, but they cannot replace ports forever, and they cannot ignore the physics of distance and wear. In late September 1944, as operations like Market Garden unfold and supply priorities become politically and militarily fraught, the Red Ball story becomes a lesson written in tire tracks. Speed is a weapon, but only if you can keep feeding it. Watkins drives one more run, eyes gritty, hands numb from vibration, and as he passes a sign still marked Red Ball Route, the red circle painted on his truck looks less like a symbol and more like a heartbeat, still beating, still pushing blood forward, but beginning to feel the strain of sustaining an entire front. And somewhere ahead, beyond the next ridge and the next river, the war waits with its next demand, ready to test whether the Allies can turn an emergency highway of trucks into a permanent supply chain strong enough to carry them all the way to Germany. October 5th, 1944, a muddy forward supply point near Verdun. Rain turns the ground into brown soup, and the canvas tops of trucks drum under the downpour. Yet the Red Ball convoys still arrive with a stubborn regularity that feels like defiance. And Watkins steps down into the muck and watches men unload fuel and ammunition as if they're unloading oxygen. Because by now, everyone at the sharp end understands the same truth. When supplies stop, courage becomes irrelevant. Lieutenant Delaney stands nearby, helmet tilted forward against the rain, and he nods once at Watkins in a wordless recognition that would have been unthinkable in peacetime hierarchy, because the logistics man and the combat man have been forced into the same equation, two variables bound by the same shortage. And in that moment, the Red Ball Express's real accomplishment becomes clear. It didn't just carry cargo, it carried tempo. It carried the ability to keep attacking when the enemy expected a pause. And that ability was psychological warfare as much as it was transport. In German headquarters further east, Keller reads reports that the Allies are repairing rail lines and opening new routes, that the improvised truck artery is being supplemented by more permanent logistics, and he feels the same sour realization again. The Red Ball was never the whole Allied supply system. It was the emergency muscle that bridged a dangerous gap, and by bridging it, the Allies denied Germany the one chance it might have had to stabilize after the Normandy disaster. The Red Ball's shock was its suddenness. An enemy that should have been forced to pause simply refused to, because thousands of trucks turned roads into an extension of the beachhead. And for weeks the advance felt like it ran on willpower, when in fact it ran on tires, fuel, and disciplined traffic control. Watkins remembers those peak days, the endless dust, the one-way routes policed by MPs, the wreckers hauling broken trucks aside like clearing casualties, the drivers sleeping in ditches and climbing back into cabs, and he understands why the story spread so quickly through the army. The Red Ball Express made logistics visible. In every other war story, supply is background, but here it became the protagonist, the thing men talked about in foxholes because they could feel it in their own weapons and stomachs. He thinks of the black soldiers who drove the majority of these runs, often in segregated units, doing an essential job under brutal conditions, while the larger society still denied them equality, and he realizes that the Red Ball's legacy is also human, an example of how modern war forces talent and labor into roles that prejudice would rather ignore. As autumn deepens, the Red Ball Express is gradually reduced and reorganized as railways, pipelines, and ports begin to shoulder more of the burden. But its impact doesn't vanish with the convoys. It remains in the habits it forced: priority routing, centralized traffic control, aggressive maintenance, the acceptance that transportation units are combat units in everything but weaponry. Delaney's unit, now fighting harder battles against organized German resistance, still depends on supply, yet the nature of dependence has shifted from desperate sprint to sustained push, and that shift is itself proof that the Red Ball bought the Allies something priceless: time, the one resource neither side can manufacture. Keller, on the German side, writes in his notes that the enemy's strength lies in movement, and the line is almost a confession that Germany's own logistics, starved of fuel and hammered from the air, cannot match the Allied system. He doesn't use the name Red Ball Express because he may not know it officially, but he knows the phenomenon. You retreat, you try to breathe, and the enemy is already there again, supplied, organized, relentless. Watkins loads up one last time under a grey sky and looks at his truck, mud-caked, scarred, patched, and thinks about how strange it is that an army's legend can be built on something as unromantic as a supply route. Yet the legend makes sense, because the Red Ball Express proved a simple, modern truth in the harshest possible lab. Tanks win battles, but trucks decide whether tanks can appear at all. In the end, German defenders weren't shocked only by American firepower. They were shocked by the fact that the firepower kept coming, that the Allies could keep pressure on across hundreds of miles, that the retreat never truly became a regroup, because an improvised highway of trucks turned victory into pursuit and pursuit into collapse.